Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Fame Advisory's webinar series. Today is the second series. The topic for today is navigating through corporate tax registration. In the light of the recent decision which was issued on the timelines for corporate tax, we thought of conducting this webinar to create this awareness. As you would all know, prior to issue of this decision, there was no formal timelines prescribed for obtaining a CT registration, and you all had time till filing of the first return to register yourselves. But now with this new decision coming up, there are specific timelines given for registration, and one needs to comply with these timelines. In case you don't comply, there are penal consequences also. So let's start this webinar. In today's webinar, we'll be touching upon these topics. Firstly, who is required to register for corporate tax? Second, what are the timelines to register? Thirdly, what is the process for registering? And last, what are the practical issues involved while obtaining corporate tax registration? Now, first, we need to understand what kind of persons are covered. We need to understand what is the legal status of the person. Only once we determine the legal status, then we understand how is corporate tax determined and what is the criteria for registration. So there are two types of persons, taxable persons and exempt persons. In case of taxable persons, firstly, what is covered is resident juridical persons. This means all the companies which are incorporated in UAE are by default have to register. Also, foreign companies which are effectively managed and controlled from UAE will also be required to register. The next category is foreign companies. Now, foreign companies will have to register only if they have a permanent establishment or a nexus. In any other case, they will not be required to register. So a foreign company may have any form of presence in the UAE. This could be a branch, a warehouse, or an agency P, or a construction P. In this case, they'll have to register. Also, foreign companies who have a nexus in the UAE. This means if they have an immovable property in UAE, in this case also, they will have to register. The fourth category is individuals. So individuals who are conducting business activities in UAE and their turnover exceeds 1 million dirham in a calendar year, those individuals will also have to register. So let us understand this better with the help of illustrations. So in the first illustration, ABC is a resident company in UAE, but there is no income for the year 24. So is this company required to register? So there's a difference between VAT registration and corporate tax registration. VAT registration is based on your turnover, but in case of corporate tax, it is not linked to your turnover threshold or any profit criteria. So all companies which are registered in UAE, by default, they'll have to register. So in this case also, even if you don't have any income for this year, you'll have to register for corporate tax. Moving to the next example. In this case, ABC has a loss of 50,000. In this case also, irrespective of any profit or revenue threshold, also this entity has to register for corporate tax. Now we get this question quite often. If it's a local entity and the profits are below 375,000, is it required to register? So as I mentioned, there is no threshold criteria. Even if a company's profits less than 375,000, a local company will have to register. Coming to foreign companies, let's take this example where a foreign company has been awarded a contract to install escalators in the shopping mall in UAE, and the installation time takes about 10 months to complete. Now, as per the corporate tax law, if the construction activities are carried out more than over 6 months, in that case, a foreign company will be considered to have a P in UAE. So in this case, A Limited has to register for corporate tax. In the next example, this is a foreign company which owns immovable property in UAE and it is earning a rental income of 1.75 million. In this case also, it will be considered that ABC has a nexus in UAE and therefore it has to register. Let's consider one more example where there's a foreign company and it has provided a loan to a local company in UAE and it is earning interest income. ABC does not have any presence in UAE. So what happens in this case? In this case, as ABC does not have any presence in UAE, but it is earning only interest which is UAE sourced income, it will not be required to register. So only in cases where foreign companies either have a P in UAE or a nexus, that is immovable property, only in these two cases a foreign company has to register. If it is earning only UAE sourced income, it is not required to register. Now let's come to individuals. Now, in case of individuals, as you all know, if an individual is conducting business activities in UAE and the turnover exceeds 1 million dirham in a calendar year, only then he is required to register. However, while calculating this turnover, three things will be excluded. First is the salary and allowances. Next is personal investment income. And the last one is real estate income earned in personal capacity. So these three categories will not be included while calculating the turnover criteria for 1 million dirham. So once you calculate whether an individual is liable to obtain CD registration, these three categories will be excluded. Now let's look at this illustration. Mr. A is an individual. He owns real estate properties in UAE. He's earning rental income of 1.5 million. He also is a real estate agent who wants commission income from selling real estate properties and is earning a commission of 2 million. Now, how do we determine whether A is required to register or not as an individual? First of all, he's conducting a business activity here by earning commission income of 2 million. That will be considered. Now, his rental income will not be considered because that is specifically excluded. Now, since the turnover exceeds 1 million dirham, he'll be required to register. Now, what happens if an individual registers in a year where the turnover is more than 1 million? However, in a subsequent year, the turnover falls below 1 million. So in this case also, individual will continue his registration. He cannot deregister unless he doesn't conduct any active businesses. So if any of the business is active, he has to continue his registration and he has to file a nil return in this case because the threshold is below 1 million. Now let's come to exempt persons. Are exempt persons required to register? So in case of government entities and government controlled entities, if you're carrying on mandated activities, they will not be required to register. However, if they are conducting a business activity, they will be required to register. Let's take the example of Emirates Airlines. So that will be considered as a business activity. So they will have to register. For extractive and non-extractive businesses also, they are not required to register. The other categories qualifying public benefit entities, investment funds, social funds, pension funds, and companies which are wholly owned and controlled by exempt persons. So in large four categories, registration has been enabled and you'll have to register. Now let's understand what are the timelines for corporate tax registration. So as we all know, recently decision number 3 was issued for a timelines for obtaining CT registration. Now there's a penalty which is defined, which is 10,000 for late registration. Prior to this, as I earlier mentioned, there was no specific timelines and you could register up to filing of your first return. But now with this decision, it is very important that we follow the timelines and we register ourselves, or otherwise there could be a penalty which could be imposed. The timeline is 20 days from the date of submission of the application, and FTA will review it and respond within 20 days. In case additional information is required and FTA will ask for such information, and once you submit it, FTA will take another 20 days to review and revert back on the application. There are these key points which we need to consider. The effective date of this decision is 1st March. While calculating the timelines for registration, we have to see the original issue date of the license, specifically the month. We have to consider that date and then calculate the deadline. The first deadline is May 24 for the companies who have January or February as their license issue date. A penalty of 10,000 will be imposed for non-submission of the application rather than on obtaining corporate tax registration. So if a person has submitted a registration application, but it has not been processed or a registration number has not been allotted, in those cases, a penalty will not be imposed. Only if you don't submit on time, then a penalty can be imposed. So now let's look at the timelines. In case of resident companies, which are incorporated before 1st March 24, below are the deadlines. So if we have to look at the month of issue or date of the license to determine what are the deadlines. So if the issue date is January or Feb, the date is 31st May. In case of March and April, the date is June. In case of May, the date is 31st July, and so on. Now, in case of if a person does not have a license, then what is the deadline? So this may happen in case of unincorporated partnership or in case of foreign companies who are effectively managed from UAE. So in that case, the deadline is 3 months from 1st March, which is May 24, 31st May 24. Also, there are cases where a company may have more than one license. So the first license which was issued will be considered, and that date will be considered to determine the deadline. Now let's look at the timelines for resident companies who are incorporated after 1st March. So in the first case, resident companies, including free zone persons, the deadline is 3 months from the date of incorporation. In case of foreign companies that are effectively managed and controlled in the UAE, the deadline is 3 months from the end of the financial year, which is followed by the foreign company. Now let's talk about individuals. So in case a resident individual has a turnover from his business activity, which exceeds 1 million in a calendar year, the deadline for registration is 31st March of the subsequent year. However, if it's a non-resident, it is within 3 months from the date when this non-resident becomes a UAE taxable person. Let's discuss about foreign companies now. So in case a foreign company has a PE before 1st March, the deadline is 9 months from the date the PE comes into existence. Now, there is a little bit of ambiguity here because it is not clear from which date the 9 months has to be calculated. Because suppose in case of a construction PE, where a person has started the construction activities and the threshold exceeds 6 months. Now, how do we calculate the 9 months? Is it from the date after 6 months, or is it from the date when the construction activity started? So that is not clear till now. Next is in case of a foreign company where the PE comes into existence after 1st March, the deadline is within 6 months from the date of existence of the PE. Now let's talk about foreign companies that have a nexus in the UAE. Nexus meaning foreign companies which own immovable properties in the UAE. So if it's a non-resident before 1st March, the deadline is within 3 months from the date of effect of this decision, which is May 24. If he is a non-resident taxpayer after 1st March, the date is within 3 months from the date of when Nexus was established. Now let's understand what is the procedure to obtain corporate tax registration. So we all know that we have to register on the Imara tax portal. For people who are already registered for VAT or excise tax, you already have your Imara tax login. So you can use those login credentials and register on the corporate tax tab. And then based on your application, if it is submitted and approved, a corporate tax registration number will be allotted. Now this registration number for corporate tax is different from the existing VAT registration number because the last digit will be different. In case of companies which are not registered for VAT and excise tax, they'll still have to register for corporate tax. So firstly, they'll have to create their login credentials on the Imara tax portal and then register, and then they'll have to apply for corporate tax registration. This is just a brief overview of the entire registration process. A person first logins to the entire Imara tax portal and submits the application form. FTA will first review the application form. If FTA approves it without any additional information, a registration number will be allotted. In the second case, FTA may ask for additional information. And once you submit the additional information, FTA will review it. Based on the information submitted, FTA can either approve and issue a registration number, or it may reject the application. In case the application is rejected, the applicant has to reapply for registration. Now let us look at the documentation requirements for the registration. So in case if it's an individual or a sole proprietorship, we require the copy of trade license if it is applicable. And second requirement is copy of Emirates and passport of the applicant. So these two documents are necessary for an individual or a sole proprietorship to get registered. Next is for any other juridical person like companies, we need trade license, copy of Emirates ID and passport of the shareholders owners. And the other additional requirement is proof of authorized signatory. So in this case, you can submit the MOA or the power of attorney as a proof. So once you log in into the Imara tax portal, there are 5 tabs which need to be completed. Firstly, the entity details. Next is the identification details, following which there are contact details. Then there are authorized signatory and review and declaration tab. Now let's look at each of these tabs. First is the entity details, where we need to first mention the entity type, the country of registration. We have to upload the incorporation certificate, mention the corporate tax period. Once we finish this tab, then we move on to the next tab. This is the identification details tab. Here we firstly need to mention the license details, the licensing authority, the issue date. Then we come to business activities. Here need to provide the business description. Now, in case there's a shareholder who owns more than 25%, it's mandatory to fill in the details of the shareholders. So once you click on this tab, the next screen pops up where you need to mention all the details of the shareholders. Once you finish this, we come to the other tab, which is the contact details. Here you mention the address, the contact details, the phone number, and the email ID of the company to be registered. After finishing this tab, then we move to authorized signatory tab. So here we need to fill in the details for the authorized signatory. We need to upload the POA or the MOA as the proof for the authorized signatory. So once we finish this, we now move to the last tab, which is review and declaration. So here you need to declare that all the information submitted is correct, and then you click on submit here. So once you submit, this screen comes up, which gives you a reference number. The acknowledgement also comes to the registered email ID as well. And once FTA approves this application, we will get a registration certificate. This is a sample registration certificate, which mentions your registration number, the legal name, address, tax period, first corporate tax period, and the filing due date for return. The next page of this certificate will also have your branch details. We often get this question whether branches of UAE companies are also required separate registration or can they file a single registration. So all the local branches of a UAE company are treated one and the same and are treated as an extension of the head office itself. So they have to be registered along with the head office and there is no separate registration. So be it a free zone company who has a branch in a mainland or a mainland company having a branch in free zone, in all the cases, there is single registration for all these companies. Now, there might be a question with then if there's a single registration, then how will the free zone branch or a free zone company avail the 0% benefit? So we believe that this mechanism of availing the benefit will be available through the corporate tax return, but the registration is a single registration. There's no separate registration. For companies who are availing small business relief, SBR, are they required to register? So as we all know, small business relief is given to small and medium enterprises or startups where the turnover does not cross 3 million dirhams in a year. And this relief is available till 31st December 26. So in this case also, any company who's availing the SBR relief will have to register because this election is every year. So once you register, you'll file a simplified return and you'll elect for the option of availing this small business relief. Now let's discuss about unincorporated partnerships. So what is an unincorporated partnership? So these are arrangements which are not incorporated, but these are arrangements for sharing of profits. This could be between two companies or between individuals or between a company or an individual. So they are not legally incorporated. That is why they are called unincorporated partnerships. Now to determine the CD registration for such unincorporated partnership, we'll have to first check who are the partners. So by default, an unincorporated partnership is treated transparent. By transparent meaning, the partnership itself is not taxable, but the partners will be considered as taxable. So in this case, where the unincorporated partnership is treated as taxable, we look at the partners. So where the partner is a juridical company, which is a juridical person or a company, in this case, he'll be already registered by default. However, if the partner is an individual, we'll have to first check what is his total turnover, including other businesses as well. So if the total turnover of that individual exceeds 1 million dirham, in that case, he'll be required to register. Also, this unincorporated partnership will have to appoint a partner, which will first register this unincorporated partnership also on the portal, and they'll be issued a corporate tax registration number. But this registration number then becomes deactivated because it's a transparent partnership and the partners are taxable. In case of opaque partnership, meaning the partnership is taxable and the partners are not taxable, the partners can make an application to the FTA to treat this as a opaque entity, meaning the partnership will be considered as taxable. They can apply for this to the FTA, and once the FTA approves, the unincorporated partnership will have to register and file the return. Let's understand this with the help of an illustration. So there is an unincorporated partnership with two partners, X Limited being a company and Mr. B, who is an individual. Let's assume that the profit sharing ratio is 75% and 25%. The revenue for the year is 2 million dirham. In the expenses is 200,000 for that year. Now, how do we determine whether this unincorporated partnership has to register? Now, let's assume that it is a fiscally transparent partnership where the partnership itself is not taxable, but the partners are considered as taxable. So then we calculate the taxable income for each partner based on the profit sharing ratio. So here the taxable income of X Limited is 1.3 million, and for Mr. B it is 450,000. Now for X Limited, by default, it has to register because there is no turnover criteria for a company. For Mr. B, we'll have to check if he has any other business, and we have to calculate his total turnover. In case his total turnover exceeds 1 million, he has to register. But in the current case, let's assume he has no other business. So here, as it is below the threshold of 1 million, he will not be required to register. Now, how do we register for tax grouping under corporate tax? So as you all know, the tax grouping under corporate tax is very different from the VAT tax grouping registration. Here, the first criteria is that there has to be a holding company. And then 95% has to be satisfied for shareholding, profit entitlement, and voting rights. Only if these three criteria are satisfied, then you can apply for a tax grouping under corporate tax. So in this case, what happens is all the parent company along with the subsidiary will have to first obtain the individual registration. So you have to apply individually on the Mana Tax portal and get the corporate tax registration number. So once all the entities have that corporate tax registration number, then you apply for the grouping registration. And once the grouping is approved by the FTA, a separate taxation number will be allotted. And this number will be used going forward for your corporate tax purpose. So here, once all the entities along with the parent and the subsidiaries are registered, you have to first log in into the parent entity using the login credentials. And then there is this tab called CT Group, Form Tax Group. So you have to click on this option and then move forward with the tax grouping application. So currently we've tried registering tax group for a lot of our clients, but till now we haven't received a single registration. So it looks like they will first approve all the single tax registrations and then maybe they start approving the tax grouping registrations. Now, what are the obligations once you're registered for CT? So once you are registered for CT and you are allotted a registration number, the first obligation is that you'll have to first file a corporate tax return within 9 months from the end of the financial year. All records and documents will have to be maintained for a period of 7 years from the end of the financial year. Third is, in case there are any changes in the registration details which we have used for the CT registration, this needs to be informed to the FTA within 20 business days. If FTA is not informed of these changes, there could be penal consequences also. In case a taxable person has not registered, in such cases, FTA also has the power to register such people. Now, it may happen that a company may have not registered for VAT and excise tax because it is not considered as taxable for VAT and excise. So there were no notifications he's received. He's not received any communication from FTA and he would have missed out on the registration email for CT. So in such case, FTA has its power to make this person register. So at his discretion, FTA can verify all the information and register such persons. Okay, so now let's discuss what are the practical issues which everyone is facing while registering any person on the Imara tax portal. The first challenge which everyone I'm sure is facing right now is the VAT amendment. So in order to proceed for the CT registration, one has to first update the VAT portal. The details like trade license, passport, if it has expired, one has to put all the recent trade license and passport. So and make these amendment. Only once these amendments are approved, only then we can proceed further with the CT application. Otherwise, it doesn't allow you to proceed with the CT application. The next is since we need to make an amendment in the VAT portal first. So now the amendments which we have put in the portal will take time. And so there might be a longer processing time for these amendments to be approved by the FTA. Once these is approved by FTA, only then you can proceed. So the wait time is longer now. Now, in case of companies which have foreign shareholder, in that case, what is happening is there is no option for foreign trade license issuing authority. So the option is not any, I mean, it is not present there in the list of options. So we don't have that option right now. As you can see, all the local entities are, so once you put in the shareholder details, only the local UAE issuing license authority is there on the screen. You will not find any foreign license authority. So in this case, what we are doing is for most of our clients who have a foreign shareholder, we are selecting the UAE licensing authority and then proceeding with the application. One more challenge which we are facing right now is that the exact business activity is not available on the Imara tax portal. So the business activity mentioned on your trade license might be very specific, and the same might not be available on the list of activities which is there on the portal. So they might differ. So in this case, we need to choose whichever is very close to that activity which is mentioned in the trade license. So if you click on the business activities, these are sample activities which will be there on the portal. So you can look at your license and then see which is the closest to your activities is mentioned on your trade license and then accordingly select. One more challenge which we're facing right now is that in case of foundations and single family offices, we are not able to select the business activity because as you all know, foundations and single family offices are not for business activity. They're either holding property or investment or managing the family affairs. So we are not able to find the exact activity for such kind of entities. Also, in case of offshore companies, currently we see that although we have submitted the application for offshore companies, however, they are not being processed and they are kept on hold. We tried checking with the FTA. The FTA informed us that right now for offshore companies, they are keeping the registered applications on hold and they will not process it because they will be issuing a decision in due course. And based on that, they will, process the application. So right now, for any offshore entity, the applications are on hold and it will not be processed. One more challenge which we are facing is also for companies which are under liquidation. There is no clear deadline, there is no clear guidelines on such companies who are already in liquidation, whether we have to register them and then re-register. So there might be a case where a company is present in 24, it is there in January, February, and then it has gone under liquidation. So in those cases, do we actually register their companies because they are already there, they are taxable person because the business exists in this year. But then you apply the re-registration because they've gone into liquidation. So there are no clear guidelines regarding this. Also for companies whose license are expired and they have already started the liquidation, it is very much not possible that, how do you register such entities? Because based on the expired license, you'll not be able to register such entities. So then what do you do in such cases? So there is no clear-cut guidance in such cases where the companies are under liquidation. So we require more clarity on this situation. Now, in case a person is no more subject to CT, meaning a company is into dissolution or liquidation, in that case, a company has to file a deregistration application. Now, this has to be filed from 3 months from the date the entity ceases to exist. Now, once it applies for this deregistration application, he has to meet all the tax appliances. He has to file his corporate tax return and pay all the tax dues. Only then the application will be processed further. With this, we come to an end of this webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar. If you have any queries, please feel free to reach out on this email ID which is mentioned on the screen. Thank you so much for joining us today.